The wind screamed through the empty plains like a wounded animal. Iron Horse Station, once a proud stop on the Frontier Railroad, was now half buried in snow. The trains had stopped running 3 days ago when the storm rolled in from the mountains. The telegraph lines were down. The platform was deserted, save for a single flickering lantern and a woman clutching her coat tight against her trembling body. Her name was Evelyn Moore, 30 years old, with the kind of beauty that hardship had refined rather than adorned. Her lips were blue, her gloved hands shaking as she tried to light another match for warmth. The flame died instantly against the wind. Her breath came out in shallow bursts, turning to frost in the air. She had been waiting for a train that would never come. She had no horse, no wagon, no family to call. Just a battered leather satchel filled with letters. Letters that weren't hers. Evelyn had been running. The town marshal in Silver Bend was probably already searching for her, though he'd never expect her to come this far north. She'd done something most people would never understand, something that couldn't be explained in court or forgiven by prayer. She'd left behind everything, chasing a single promise of redemption that now seemed as distant as the sound of a train whistle in this blizzard. Her knees buckled, and she sank onto the frozen bench. Snow piled on her hat brim and shoulders. She whispered through chattering teeth, "Please. Just one train. Just one more chance." But no one answered. Only the sound of the wind and the faint creak of a hanging sign above her Iron Horse Station. The light of her lantern dimmed. The cold sank deep into her bones, making her vision swim. She pressed her hand against her satchel as if it could protect her from the elements. The world around her faded to white dot, and then out of the storm came the sound of footsteps, not boots. Softer, quieter. Evelyn blinked, struggling to see through the snow. A tall figure emerged from the white veil, moving like a shadow with purpose. He was wrapped in a fur-lined hide cloak, his long black hair streaked with snow. His skin, bronze and marked with the faintest traces of war paint, seemed to glow against the pale storm. An Apache. He knelt beside her without a word. His eyes were sharp, dark and calm, eyes that had seen far too much of both death and mercy. Evelyn tried to speak but only managed a weak sound. Her breath came out as a faint gasp. "You shouldn't be here," she managed, though her words were nearly lost to the wind. He studied her, then touched her wrist, feeling the faint pulse beneath her glove. He said something in Apache, a language that rolled like thunder over stone. When she didn't respond, he looked toward the empty station and then back to her. He understood one thing clearly. She wouldn't survive another hour out here. Without hesitation, he lifted her into his arms. Evelyn's head fell against his shoulder, and for the first time in days, she felt warmth strong. Human warmth radiating through the storm. The man's name, though she wouldn't learn it until later, was Tasunke, which meant horse spirit in his tongue. He had no home nearby, no reason to help a stranger, but something in the woman's eyes had pulled him out of his hidden path. Perhaps it was fate. Perhaps it was a ghost from his past that wore her face. Through the blizzard, Tasunke carried her toward the woods beyond the station. Snow bit at his bare arms where his cloak fell open, but he moved with steady grace, his breath visible in the freezing air. When he reached the shelter of the trees, he laid her beside a small camp he had built earlier, hidden among pine trunks and rocky ledges. A fire burned low beneath a canvas lean-to. He worked quickly unfastening her cloak, wrapping her in furs and pressing her cold hands between his. Her pulse fluttered weakly. For hours he kept her alive by sheer will. He spoke to her softly in his own language, words she didn't understand but somehow felt. When Evelyn finally stirred, her lashes heavy with frost, she saw his face clearly for the first time in the glow of firelight's strong jawline, sharp features and eyes that looked both dangerous and kind. "Where am I?" she whispered. He didn't answer immediately. He just looked at her. This stranger the snow had delivered into his life. Finally, in slow, accented English, he said, "You are alive. That is enough for now." And outside, the wind howled like a warning. Evelyn woke to the sound of crackling firewood and the faint smell of smoke mixed with pine sap. The world was still white beyond the lean-to, but the storm had softened into a gentle fall of flakes drifting through the air like ash from heaven. She blinked, disoriented. Her fingers were wrapped in fur, her body covered with a heavy hide blanket that radiated warmth that it took her a few moments to remember where she was. The train station, the storm, the shadow in the snow. Then she heard movement behind her. Tasunke. He was crouched near the fire, bare-chested despite the cold, his strong frame outlined by the glow of the flames. His hair long, black and damp from melted snow fell over his shoulders. The faint gleam of bone jewelry caught the firelight as he adjusted a pot above the coals. Evelyn's heart thudded. She tried to sit up, but a sharp ache ran through her limbs. "Where am I?" she asked weakly. Tasunke turned his head slightly, his voice deep but calm. "Shelter. You were dying in the storm. I remember." She shivered. "The station. I thought I saw someone, then everything went dark." "You saw me," he said, stirring whatever boiled in the pot. "You are safe now." She studied him in the firelight, his scars, his stillness, the way he seemed both wild and deliberate, like an animal that had learned to live among ghosts. "Why would you help me?" she asked. "I'm a stranger." Tasunke lifted the pot from the fire and poured a steaming mixture of herbs into a wooden cup. "Because the snow takes everything," he said quietly. "Man or woman, innocent or guilty. I will not let it take another." He handed her the drink. The smell was strange, earthy and bitter, but the warmth seeped through her palms. She sipped, feeling heat spread back into her chest. "Thank you," she murmured. "You have no idea what that means." His dark eyes flickered toward her. "Maybe I do?" They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the pop of pine logs and the soft whisper of snow outside. Evelyn glanced around the small camp animal pelts, a bow, a few hunting knives, and a horse tethered under a tree. It was clear this man lived far from the world she knew. Still, something about him felt familiar. Not in his face, but in the loneliness that hung between them. Tasunke broke the silence first. "You carry letters," he said, nodding toward her satchel lying near the fire. "You guard them even in the storm." Evelyn stiffened. "You looked through my things?" He shook his head. "No, but I saw how you held it. Like it was your heart." She turned her face toward the fire. "They're not mine. They belong to someone who can't speak for themselves." He didn't press further, but she could tell he was curious. Evelyn swallowed hard, the memory returning like a wound. The town marshal's face, the smoke from the fire that night, the letters she'd taken from the sheriff's desk before running into the storm. Each one carried a name, men who'd done unspeakable things but never faced judgment. She was running with her confessions, and she wasn't sure if she was the hero or the fool. Tasunke rose, moving with the quiet power of a wolf. "You rest," he said. "When storm stops, I take you to the next town." "No," she said quickly. "I can't go to town." "Not yet." He paused, watching her carefully. "Someone hunts you." Evelyn hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, and if they find me, they'll kill me before I can tell the truth." The fire crackled louder for a moment, filling the silence between them. Tasunke knelt again, his face unreadable. "Truth is a heavy thing," he said. "Sometimes it buries you deeper than snow." Evelyn met his gaze, trembling. "And yet, you saved me anyway." "I don't save," he said, voice low. "I just don't let death win when I can help it." The way he said it, like a vow carved from loss, made her wonder who he had once failed to save. She wanted to ask, but exhaustion crept over her again. The warmth, the fire, the strange security of his presence, all of it dulled the sharp edges of her fear. Her eyes grew heavy-dot as she drifted to sleep. Tasunke sat quietly beside her, feeding another log into the fire. Outside, the storm eased, revealing the ghostly outlines of mountains in the distance. He watched her breathing steady, then looked toward the horizon with eyes haunted by something old and unspoken. Tomorrow, he knew, her trouble would follow. But for tonight, beneath the whispering pines, they had found something close to peace. Evelyn woke to the muted light of dawn filtering through the trees. The storm had passed, leaving the forest wrapped in a calm, ghostly silence. Her body still ached, but she could feel warmth in her fingers again. The fire had burned low, its embers glowing beneath a crust of ash. Tasunke was gone. She sat up quickly, clutching the fur blanket around her. For a moment, panic flickered in her chest until she noticed footprints in the snow leading away from the camp. He hadn't left her. He'd gone to hunt or gather. Evelyn exhaled shakily, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. She reached for her satchel. The letters were still there, wrapped in oilskin and tied with a strip of leather. She pressed it to her chest. When Tasunke returned, he carried a rabbit and a handful of wild herbs. He looked at her briefly, then wordlessly began preparing the meal. Evelyn watched him work, the precision of his hands, the quiet grace with which he moved. It was as if every gesture carried a story. "You were gone a while," she said softly. He nodded without looking up. "Tracks near the ridge." "Not animal." Her heart tightened. "You mean people?" "Two men on horseback," he replied. "Riding slow, searching." Evelyn swallowed. "They're looking for me." He turned then, eyes narrowing. "Why?" For a long time she said nothing. The truth had lived too long in the dark, it hurt to speak it out loud. But she saw no judgment in his face, only quiet patience. "I worked in Silver Bend," she said finally. "At the telegraph office beside the sheriff's hall. I read things I wasn't supposed to, letters, confessions, deals made in the dark. Men in that town. They bought land by spilling blood, and they sent their crimes through my wires thinking no one would ever read them." Tasunke listened, silent. "I couldn't keep quiet," she continued. "There was a man, Marshal Ebbett. Everyone called him the law, but he was worse than the outlaws he hunted. He took money from ranchers, buried evidence, and killed witnesses. When I tried to report him, they burned down my office. I barely escaped." She opened the satchel and showed him the letters. "These are the proof. Their own words, signed and sealed. If I can get them to Fort Ellison, the military court will see everything." Tasunke's gaze lingered on the papers, then on her face. "You risk death for paper." "They're not just paper," she said fiercely. "They're justice." He didn't argue, but she saw something flicker in his eyes, a distant pain, the kind that came from a life where justice had been a luxury no one could afford. After a moment, he said quietly, "One of those names, Ebbett. I know that name." Evelyn froze. "You do?" "He led a raid 2 winters ago," Tasunke said. "Said it was to capture horse thieves. But they were my people. Women and old men. He took 20 lives that night." Evelyn stared at him. "You mean you were there?" "I buried them," he said simply. The silence that followed felt heavy as the snow around them. Evelyn's throat tightened. "Then you know why I have to stop him." He looked at her for a long time, his expression unreadable. "If these men find you, they will kill you before you reach the fort." "I know," she whispered. "But I can't stop now." Tasunke turned back to the fire, feeding a branch into the flames. "Then I will take you there." Her breath caught. "You don't have to do that." "I do," he said firmly. "The snow brought you to me for a reason. Maybe this is it." Evelyn felt something shift deep inside her, a strange mixture of gratitude and fear. "You'd risk your life for someone you barely know?" He glanced at her. "I know enough. You fight the same ghost I do." They ate in silence after that, but the air between them had changed. A fragile alliance had formed, bound not by trust alone, but by a shared wound carved by the same man. As the sun dipped behind the trees, painting the snow gold, Tasunke began saddling his horse. Evelyn packed the letters carefully. "Tonight we ride east," he said. "The Soldier's Road cuts through Black Elk Canyon. Dangerous, but faster." Evelyn nodded. "I'll follow your lead." He mounted his horse, then offered her his hand. She took it. His grip was strong, steady, the kind of strength that made her believe they might actually make it. As they rode into the fading light, the forest swallowed their tracks, and somewhere far behind them, two riders in black coats reached the abandoned iron horse station. One of them knelt in the snow, touching a single fallen glove. "She's alive," he said, "but not for long." The moon hung like a pale coin over the snow-laden pines as Evelyn and Tasunke rode east through the wilderness. The world was quiet except for the sound of the horses' hooves crunching over ice and the whisper of wind sweeping through the trees. Every now and then, Evelyn glanced back, half expecting shadows to follow. They had traveled for hours since leaving the shelter, and the storm's fury had given way to an eerie calm. The air was sharp, biting at their faces, and frost gathered on the horses' mane. Ahead lay Black Elk Canyon, a narrow cut between two towering ridges that looked like the jaws of the earth itself. Tasunke reined in his horse at the edge of the canyon. "From here," he said, his voice low, "the trail is hidden. Safer if you trust your feet." Evelyn dismounted, her boots sinking into the snow. "And if I don't?" He looked at her with the faintest trace of a smile. "Then you freeze out here." That was as close to humor as she'd seen from him. She gave a small nod and followed as he led the horse down into the canyon's narrow passage. The wind dropped away between the cliffs, leaving only the sound of dripping water and their own footsteps echoing softly against stone. The deeper they went, the darker it became. The moonlight could no longer reach them. Tasunke lit a torch, its orange glow dancing over the rock walls painted with faded pictograph symbols of warriors, horses, and spirits. Evelyn slowed, gazing at them. "Your people's marks?" He nodded. "Long before your railroad came." There was pride in his tone, but sorrow too. Evelyn could feel the weight of centuries pressing down from these canyon wall stories, carved into stone that few would ever read again. As they walked, Evelyn's thoughts returned to the letters in her satchel. Each one was a promise of truth, but truth had a cost. She wondered if Tasunke understood that better than anyone. "Do you ever wish you'd walked away?" she asked suddenly. He looked at her. "From what?" "From revenge. From justice. From all of it." He stopped, the torchlight flickering across his strong face. "Once," he said. "But when you bury your people, you stop wishing. You start remembering." Before Evelyn could answer, Tasunke raised a hand for silence. His eyes darted upward toward the canyon rim. A faint sound metal against stone. A spark of reflected moonlight. "Get down," he whispered. Evelyn crouched behind a boulder just as a gunshot cracked through the night. The bullet struck the wall inches from her head, showering her with bits of rock. The horse reared, snorting. "Move!" Tasunke shouted. They ran deeper into the canyon as more shots rang out, echoing wildly in the narrow pass. Evelyn clutched her satchel to her chest, her breath sharp and fast. Tasunke grabbed her arm, pulling her behind another ridge of stone. His body shielded hers as dust and snow rained down. "They found us," she gasped. He nodded grimly. "2 riders. Maybe 3. They track well." Evelyn's voice trembled. What do we do? Tasunke's eyes burned like the firelight. We fight smarter. He knelt, pressing his palm to the ground, studying the tracks and the slope. Canyon splits ahead, he murmured. You go right narrow trail to the river. I draw them left. No, she said fiercely. I'm not leaving you to die. He gave her a look that made her heart twist. You won't help me by dying beside me. Go. The letters matter. Tasunke. He placed a hand against her cheek, rough and warm even through the cold. You carry truth. I carry shadow. Let each do their part. Before she could protest again, he rose and slipped away into the darkness like smoke. Seconds later, another gunshot rang out, then another. The echoes bounced off the canyon walls, masking his movements. Evelyn ran, the satchel tight against her chest. The narrow trail twisted like a serpent between stone cliffs. Her breath burned her throat, her heart pounding as she stumbled through snow and loose rock. Behind her, she heard voices rough, angry. One called out, "She's running east." After her. She turned a corner and nearly slipped into a frozen riverbed. The moon broke through the clouds for a brief moment, painting the ice silver. Evelyn dropped to her knees, crawling behind a fallen log. Then, from far behind, came a scream harsh, cut short by silence. Her blood ran cold. She wanted to turn back. But she remembered Tasunke's words, "You carry truth. I carry shadow." So she kept moving. By the time she reached the riverbank, her legs were numb, her lungs aching. The world was still again, except for the faint hiss of wind through the canyon. She looked back toward the darkness where Tasunke had vanished. "Please be alive," she whispered into the cold night. A faint flicker of orange light flared somewhere in the distance, a torch swaying low. Whether it was his or theirs, she didn't know. All she could do was pray. The river was frozen solid, a white ribbon cutting through the wilderness beneath the canyon walls. Evelyn stumbled across it, her breath trembling in the air, her boots sliding on the slick surface. Every sound a crack of ice, the whisper of wind made her flinch. Somewhere behind her, the echoes of gunfire had faded, swallowed by distance and snow, but Tasunke had not returned. She crouched at the riverbank beneath a cluster of bare trees, clutching the satchel against her chest. The cold gnawed at her fingers even through her gloves. Her legs trembled from exhaustion and fear, yet she couldn't bring herself to stop searching the darkness. "Tasunke," she whispered, as though his name might summon him from the night. A rustle in the woods made her spin. She reached for a rock, her pulse racing only to see a lone horse emerge from the shadows, steam rising from its nostrils. Tasunke's horse, her heart clenched. The animal's saddle was empty, streaked with blood. Evelyn bit back a sob. She took the reins, stroking the horse's muzzle to calm it. "You made it out," she whispered. "Then maybe he did too." She led the horse into a thicket, concealing them both beneath the shelter of fallen branches. There, she built a small fire, just enough to thaw her hands and think. The flames cast her face in amber light, and for the first time since the storm, she felt utterly alone. The canyon had gone quiet. No voices, no shots. Just the whisper of snow falling gently over a world that had nearly forgotten warmth. She couldn't stay there. If Tasunke was alive, he'd find her trail by morning. If not, she had to reach Fort Ellison on her own. She had the letters, and she had a promise to keep. Evelyn stared into the fire, her mind flickering back to the last look in his eyes before he vanished into the dark. The way he'd said, "You carry truth." "I carry shadow." Then she heard it footsteps. Slow, heavy. Approaching through the snow dot, her hand shot to the pistol she'd taken from the marshal's desk before fleeing Silver Bend. It was old, barely functional, but better than nothing. She aimed toward the sound, her breath tight. The figure emerged from the trees, massive, broad-shouldered, and limping. "Tasunke?" she gasped. He stepped into the firelight, his chest bare, streaked with blood and soot, his long black hair damp with melted snow. His eyes met hers, and for a moment all the fear melted away. "You thought I was Ghost," he said with a faint, tired smirk. Evelyn ran to him, catching his arm before he could fall. "You're hurt, not enough to stop breathing," he murmured. She helped him to the fire, the light revealing a deep gash along his ribs. He winced as she tore a strip from her coat to bind it. "I told you to go," he said softly. "I did," she whispered, her hands trembling as she pressed the cloth against his wound. "But I wasn't leaving you out there." He looked at her, something unreadable in his dark eyes. "Foolish." "Maybe," she said, "but I don't regret it." For a moment, the only sound between them was the wind sighing through the trees. Then Tasunke spoke again, his voice low. "The riders. I took one down. The others ran, but they will come back with more." Evelyn swallowed. "Then we move before sunrise." He nodded slowly. "We follow river north. I know path. Hidden from soldiers. Takes us close to fort." She met his gaze. "Will you make it?" He smiled faintly. "If you stop talking, maybe." Evelyn laughed through her tears, a small, fragile sound that felt strange in this frozen wilderness. She hadn't realized how much she'd missed laughter until that moment. As night deepened, Tasunke leaned back against a fallen log, his eyes half closed. Evelyn sat beside him, feeding the fire. Her exhaustion finally caught up with her, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, she watched him, his steady breathing, the way his scars caught the firelight, the faint rise and fall of his chest. He had saved her life twice now. Yet it was more than that. In his silence, she found safety. In his eyes, a strength she couldn't name. When dawn broke, the forest glowed pale blue. Mist drifted off the river. Tasunke stirred, rising slowly. "Time," he said. Evelyn packed the satchel and doused the fire. Together, they led the horse across the frozen water, their shadows stretching long behind them. Far above, unseen on the canyon ridge, two men on horseback watched them disappear into the northern woods. One of the riders lowered his spyglass. "She's not alone," he muttered. "The savage is with her." The other smirked. "Good. 2 graves instead of 1. As the sun rose over the wild frontier, Evelyn and Tasunke vanished into the white horizon, 2 hunted souls bound by purpose, walking a road that would either save them or end them. The northern winds bit harder than ever, cutting through Evelyn's coat and shaking the satchel from her numb fingers. Every step along the narrow path beside the frozen river was a battle against fatigue and frostbite. She shivered uncontrollably, teeth chattering as her breath came in ragged clouds. Tasunke rode ahead, occasionally glancing back, his bare chest a stark contrast against the snow. His long black hair was plastered to his shoulders with ice and sweat, and his tribal jewelry, bone necklaces, leather armbands, and feathers clinked softly with every motion. Despite the wounds he had suffered the night before, his movements were deliberate, almost fluid, like a predator who had survived countless battles. "Evelyn," he called softly, "keep moving. Almost to the bend shelter lies just beyond." Her legs trembled beneath her. I can't," she admitted, collapsing onto a snow-covered boulder. Frost had settled deep into her bones, and her fingers were pale, stiff, almost useless. The letters in her satchel felt impossibly heavy. Tasunke dismounted immediately, landing beside her with barely a sound. He studied her, eyes narrowed. "You will not die here," he said firmly. I can't go on," she gasped. "I'm freezing, and my legs won't move." He knelt, his hands warm and strong against her ice-cold arms. "Listen," he said in a low, commanding voice. "Death waits for the weak, not for those who fight. You carry what others fear to face. If you falter now, everything is lost." She shook her head. I don't know if I can." His gaze softened, just slightly, and he lifted her into his arms. Muscular and unwavering, he carried her through the snow, each step deliberate, every movement careful. She buried her face into his chest, inhaling the faint scent of pine and sweat. Feeling warmth spread through her frozen body. The wind howled over the frozen river, whipping through their hair and biting at any exposed skin. Snowflakes clung to Tasunke's hair and shoulders, but he moved steadily, unwavering, the embodiment of resilience. Each step was a testament to his skill and determination, honed by a life in the wilderness. After what felt like hours, the bend in the river appeared. There, tucked between a cluster of cliffs, was a small cave partially hidden behind a snowdrift. Smoke rose faintly from the entrance, indicating that someone, or perhaps only a previous traveler, had built a fire. Tasunke laid Evelyn gently inside. Her body sagged with exhaustion, but she felt safe in a way she had never known. He fanned the embers and stoked a small fire, the warmth crawling into her frozen limbs. Her teeth stopped chattering, and her pulse, once erratic from cold, began to steady. "You must rest," he said quietly. "I will stay." Evelyn looked at him, the firelight illuminating his bronze skin and the muscular lines of his torso, the scars etched from past battles, the tribal jewelry glinting faintly in the glow. "Tasunke, why are you doing this? Why risk yourself?" He didn't answer immediately, his eyes fixed on the fire. Finally, he said, "Because snow takes everything, and your life cannot be taken today." The intimacy of his words startled her. She felt a strange connection, forged in shared survival and whispered truths. Her fingers trembled, not from cold, but from the intensity of the moment. Hours passed. Evelyn drifted in and out of sleep, the warmth from the fire keeping her alive. She dreamed of snow-white plains and the distant train she had sought, the letters she carried now seeming impossibly important. More than ever, Tasunke sat silently beside her, alert and watchful. Every sound outside the cave, the crunch of distant snow, the howl of the wind, made him tense. He scanned the shadows beyond the entrance, knowing hunters could be closing in, yet confident in his ability to protect her. When dawn approached, the light of a pale sun filtering through the snow created a surreal world of gold and white. Evelyn stirred, blinking against the brightness. She looked at Tasunke, still bare-chested, his long hair iced at the tips, his eyes dark and fierce, yet softened by the firelight. "Morning," she whispered weakly. "Morning," he replied, standing and stretching, his muscles flexing beneath the sunlight. "We move before they know we are here." Evelyn nodded. Despite the frostbite creeping into her fingers and toes, she felt hope again. With Tasunke's strength and determination carrying her forward, the road to Fort Ellison seemed possible. The snow swirled around them as they stepped outside the cave, ready to continue their journey together toward justice and survival. The trees thinned as Evelyn and Tasunke approached the outskirts of Fort Ellison, a modest cluster of wooden buildings surrounded by snow-covered plains. The fort's walls were high, the gates shut tight against the winter winds, and the smoke from chimneys promised warmth and witnesses. Evelyn's fingers tightened around the leather strap of her satchel, inside which lay the letters that could topple men like Marshal Tasunke rode beside her, bare-chested despite the chill, long black hair plastered with snow and sweat, muscles tense and glistening, and tribal jewelry catching the pale sunlight. His eyes scanned the horizon constantly, alert for any sign of the hunters who had dogged them since Black Elk Canyon. Every instinct told him danger lurked nearby, Yet his focus remained unwavering: protect the woman who carried justice. Almost there, he murmured. His voice low but calm. Evelyn exhaled, the wind carrying her breath in icy clouds. Do you think they'll believe me? She asked, worry threading her voice. Tasunke glanced at her, a faint smirk playing on his lips. They will have to. You carry proof they cannot deny. And if they do, I will ensure they regret it. The journey through the snow had left her weak, but she had survived because of him. Every step she took toward the fort was a triumph over exhaustion and fear. She looked at him, this wild, powerful man who had saved her life more times than she could count, and a strange warmth rose in her chest, rivaling the chill of the snow. They dismounted at the gate. Tasunke kept one hand on the reins, the other resting near his knife, ready for anything. Evelyn approached the sentry, revealing herself and explaining her urgent mission. The guards were skeptical, but the letters she presented sealed, undeniable, and signs spoke louder than her words. Marshal Ebbett, a man with a face as cold as iron, emerged from the fort. His eyes widened slightly when he recognized Evelyn, but he masked it with a sneer. So the telegraph clerk returns with tales of wrongdoing? He said, voice dripping with disdain. I return with proof, Evelyn replied firmly, holding the letters aloft. Your crimes are recorded here. You killed, you cheated, you burned, and now the true law will see justice. Ebbett's face darkened. You think a few papers will stop me? Tasunke stepped forward from the shadows beside Evelyn. The sight of him muscular, bare-chested, long black hair cascading over his shoulders, tribal jewelry glinting in the morning sun was enough to make the men around the fort pause. His presence was commanding, untamed, and undeniably dangerous. You threaten her and you face me, he said simply. Evelyn's voice trembled with determination. It's over, Ebbett. The men you wronged are gone, but their words remain. And I have brought them here. A tense silence fell. The guards shifted uneasily, recognizing the power in Tasunke's stance. Ebbett's jaw tightened, realizing he could not act openly without exposing himself. The fort commander stepped forward, examining the letters. He read quickly, eyes widening as he absorbed the contents. This is undeniable. Marshal Ebbett, you are under arrest. Ebbett's face twisted with rage, but there was nothing he could do. Tasunke's presence made interference unthinkable, and the proof Evelyn carried was overwhelming. Guards moved to secure him. Evelyn sank to her knees, relief washing over her. She looked at Tasunke, whose strong frame stood like a sentinel against the bitter winter. We did it, she whispered. He knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. You carried truth through snow and shadow, he said quietly. I only carried you through the storm. Her lips curved into a grateful, tired smile. You did more than that. You saved me. More than once. Outside, the snow continued to fall gently, dusting the fort and plains alike. But inside, a sense of warmth spread not from the fire or the buildings, but from the triumph of justice and survival. Evelyn and Tasunke stood together at the edge of the fort, looking out over the frozen plains. The wind no longer bit as sharply. It carried a promise of new beginnings. You'll stay? Evelyn asked softly. Tasunke glanced at her, the sun glinting off his jewelry, muscles flexed from tension now relaxed. Where you go, I will follow, he said. The snow brought us together. Perhaps fate will guide us further. She reached for his hand, and he took it with the strength and gentleness of a man who had faced death and found reason to protect life. As they stood together, two hunted souls bound by survival and justice. The snow whispered around them, erasing tracks, hiding scars, and marking the beginning of a story that would be remembered not just for its danger, but for the courage, trust, and human connection that had carried them through. The letters were delivered. The criminals held accountable, and Evelyn, once a fugitive, once freezing and alone at Iron Horse Station, had survived. And by her side, Tasunke, the Apache warrior, remained a symbol of strength, loyalty, and the enduring bond of fate. The frontier stretched endlessly before them, white and silent, but no longer threatening. Together they rode forward, not just as survivor and protector, but as companions bound by trials overcome, carrying hope, justice, and the warmth of human connection into the snowy wilderness of the Old West.